Good evening, friends. This is Dr. Bill here. And I felt like before I go to get into the fifth grade to 10th grade, how to get from La La Land to 0, 1, and 2 land, I wanted to take a little detour for you just to make sure that you understand that a short constructed response that's 2 points with the answer and the evidence is basically the foundation for the extended constructed response, where you write an entire essay instead of just 2 or 3 sentences. Now, as part of the service of you signing up for the extended constructed response series, you can send me some of your student responses. Now, I normally would only ask for 1 or 2, you know, samples from you, but one of you in the group was asking me for some guidance in terms of how do I make sure that my students on the short constructed response use evidence that actually relates to the question, but also answers the question that's being asked and not just summarizes text or only gives evidence. And I was mentioning in one of my previous posts that that's sort of like giving the reader the teeter without the totter, or the see without the saw. Now, I want to briefly mention the picture frame behind me. It says, "The greatest gift I ever received came from God, my family." The reason I put that one up today is because the teacher who asked me for some guidance on how to make sure the students have the answer and the evidence was because it was a poem called, let me make sure I give you guys the right name, called "Looking for the Gulf Motel." And so a couple of things I want to make sure we clear up that I noticed with this campus or with this district. The question has to be there in the form of a question mark for all SCR answer evidence questions. In other words, you actually have to have a who, what, when, where, what, where, why, which in the form of a question. It also cannot say the word explain in a short constructed response. The second sentence cannot have anything except the phrase, the sentence, "Be sure to support your answer with evidence from the selection." You can't add any extra information to give your kids clues about where to go or what to do. Now, I think what is going to be important, and I brought him with me today, is to help you understand what this question is asking. Okay? I'm not going to let you see it yet. I'm going to just read it to you. It says SCR Prompt. Okay, so as soon as it says SCR Prompt, there better only be 2 sentences, and one of them needs to be a question. It says explain, wah, 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 how the author uses sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memory. What you needed to have said, and I'm going to show you it in a moment. How does the author use sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memory? Question mark. The second sentence says, include text evidence to support your answer and a visual. That part can't be there because they're never going to give a clue or add any information to that second sentence, which is just the one that's make sure you show your evidence, dude. Okay. So first of all, the question was a how question. How does the author use sensory images? Okay, so the specific topic is the author and sensory images. If the students are not paying attention to the sensory images or even know what that means, they're going to struggle. So you probably have to do some background teaching. And the best way to do that is to go buy a reel or use one of my paper potato heads that I have in both the Dear Doc binder and the little mini binder. Okay. I brought one that you can buy from Dollar Tree. So when they tell you about sensory images, sensory comes from the root word sense, not common sense, but the five senses. What you can see, hear, smell, taste, or touch. So since the topic was asking about that T for topic, the next thing your kids are going to do is go to the evidence and look for as much see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. And so what you can do as you're reading through here, you can remove on the potato head that you can buy at Walmart for about $5 or $6, take off all of his eyes, ears, nose, and only plug in those parts, because whenever it says be sure to include evidence from the text, well, I've only got to have one piece of evidence, one or more, in order to get the point for evidence. And so I'm going to show you, because I highlighted every piece of evidence that I found in the poem, because I need to make sure that my answer is based on evidence, not that my answer just has a bunch of the prompt words, but no actual answer. Okay, so let's review the other W's that could be asked in a answer evidence short constructed 2-point question that ends in a question mark. Who, what, when, where, why, which, or how. This one happens to be a how. Let's go ahead and take a look at it so I can show you what I mean by, let's make sure that we have our information, our practice test laid out the way that the students are going to see it on the test. So it's okay to have SCR prompt there. The kids, they have to understand that a prompt is similar to a topic. It may or may not have the word prompt. I hope it does. But like I said, you can't put the word explain in a short constructed response. I've only seen it one time in all of the 3 years, like in the practice years and the pre STAR 2.0, because they have to be careful that they don't steer the students towards an extended constructed response. So explain how the author uses sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memory. I broke it down into pieces like I tell you to always do, even though it's a short constructed. Include text evidence to support your answer and a visual. No, I'm gonna take that part out and make sure that it's seen the same way that they're going to see it on the real test, and that you change it to a question with a question mark right there. Okay. So this school district has their criteria. You get a 2 for the answer and your evidence is cited. You get a 1 if you have the answer um, is accurate or incomplete evidence, or the correct answer but inaccurate evidence, or the response is not text-based. There's no response, there's no evidence, there's no answer. It doesn't say that, but that's what they mean. Okay. Let me show you what I did a couple of years ago. I call it TEAR for SCR in the ER. So instead of using this extended acronym that kids can't even remember all the crap that's on it, if your students can just make sure that they have a sentence with evidence and a sentence that has the response, the answer to the question, then they're going to get the 2 points. All right. So let's review our topic, T. How does the author use sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memory, question mark, and include text evidence to support your answer? So there's the topic. The E for evidence is in yellow because we tend to highlight in yellow. So I'm going to look for evidence, and I'm either going to get a 2 green light, a 1 yellow light, or a 0 red light. And so this little activity is going to be sent to all of you who are members of the extended constructed response, because remember what I said, the foundation for giving a central idea with evidence that you explain is giving an answer with evidence that you don't need to explain. And the good thing about these short constructed response, they don't count off on the grammar unless it is I indecipherable, I illegible, I incoherent. Okay. So I'm going to do my little teeter totter. My hands are going to be out here. Evidence and response equals 2. Evidence or response equals 1, as long as I have one or the other. Evidence nor response equals 0. And the way that short constructed responses work is that if it's 2 people, they both have to have put the same score. If it's the 75% that are graded by the automated scoring engine, then in order for it to qualify, the 2 scores that it puts have to be the same in order to, if there's a 2 and a 0, that would probably be red flagged, and then they would get the human grader. And so the teacher gave me 9 responses, and I kind of chose randomly ones to put in here. How did the student get a 1? And so what the cool activity you can do is there's dotted lines on here where your students can color first. 2 is good for green. One is caution for yellow because you're missing one or the other, and 0 is red for warning, warning, warning. So the responses that I have inside here are number 5 for a 2, and it was kind of iffy, and I'll explain it to you. Number 1 that I gave a 1 to because I had the evidence or the response, and number 8 that had neither the evidence nor the response. And the good thing is for your all's benefit, uh, you're gonna get to see just my perspective. I don't know these students. I don't know how much they've grown from August to now October. So I'm going to be giving an unbiased score based on what the question is asking and if they answered it and took the time to include evidence that ties with the answer and the topic. All right. So, evidence. I went through the entire poem. I numbered the stanzas, as you can see here on the left-hand side, and I highlighted every time that sensory images were used because that's what the question was asking about. So I plugged in or pretended to plug in Mr. Potato Head's eyes in stanza 2. His eyes again, his smell, his eyes, sight and sound in stanza 4, the smell and taste in stanza 4, not seeing. So imagery is or can also be things that you don't see, don't smell, taste, touch, because that is based on the senses. Visual, this is a unique one here. My father should be alive. Slow dancing with my mom on the sliding glass balcony. So there's a negative there that he should be alive and he's not seeing his dad, so that's a negative. But the positive was if he would have been alive, he would have been able to see his dad dancing with his mom on a balcony. Okay. And then I continued to do the same thing, as you see. So there's plenty of evidence that is imagery, senses, sensory image, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes you can use the setting to paint a picture because you're going to be able to, like in the beginning of a movie, they only move the camera around without people talking normally because they want you to see and hear and imagine what you'd be able to touch or taste or smell if you were there on location on the set, if that makes sense. Okay. So I have plenty of evidence. And so we'll see if the students, because uh, they're not the thing that I would recommend, because this is a poem, typically they would have line numbers 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. I didn't see that here, and that's something else that I think would improve the quality of this selection, this poem, because that's how the state tends to put. They won't put the stanzas, but they will put every 5 lines so that the student can work his way. It's the student's job to write down stanza numbers, and they have to understand that sometimes a stanza can only have 1 line. Right? So let's go to number 1, and that's the one that I put on my evidence and response. How the author uses sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memories when he talks about their time in the Gulf Motel. Okay. So that part, when he talks about their time in the Gulf Motel, that's an answer to the question. Okay. So now all you have to do is give me evidence of that. Well, the evidence that there's, it says in stanza 7, there should be nothing here I don't remember. That's not a see or a set. That's not letting me see something or hear something or taste, touch, or smell. So on number 1, if I look back here, X, there should be nothing I don't remember. That's a thought or an opinion, not a sensory image. So no credit for evidence. If I flip over to the response side, he talks about their time in the Gulf Motel. That's the answer. That also includes the prompt, the restating that some of you have your kids do. How the author uses sensory image to convey the details of his memory. He actually has an answer. All right. So the problem is there's no specific evidence that shows one of their times in the Gulf Hotel. They were describing a lot of other things around the hotel, before the hotel, but because he uses the time in the hotel, then the evidence should be based on something that that he saw, smelled, tasted, touched, or um, heard at the hotel. Number 2, okay. When I get to number 5 and 8, I'll make sure I go back to that little form. The author uses sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memory. Prompt. By seeing his parents dance on the patio. For example, in stanza 6 on line, my father should still be alive dancing with my mother. And I say, okay, so that's evidence, but there's nothing here on this first part except for the prompt, because the student is just using evidence, not actually answering. So here's an example of how this could have gotten a 2. The prompt, okay, is the idea, the question, the answer would be an idea from the student's head based on evidence used. So the author uses sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memory, to show how much he misses his mom and dad being together. That would be something that would relate to my father should still be alive. I miss him. They're together. And then he would be able to use this evidence and that answer to have gotten 2 points. Because remember, an idea comes from your student's head. Number 3, the author, we need to invent a button called shift on our computers for many students, it seems. The author uses the details to tell us how it was for him in that time. Okay, that's too vague. How it was for him about what? You're going to have to be a GPS, get pretty specific when you're answering the question. So because I felt like that answer was too vague, I didn't give it the red point for the response. But there is some evidence here. The I get to see, smell, and taste the terry jacket cloth smoke, the smoking, clinking a glass of amber whiskey in the sunset at the Gulf Motel, watching us dive into the pool. So if since this was in the hotel, if this could have been placed, if you have one student that has that great evidence, say, hey, you know what? Your evidence would have gone great with the student who got the point for saying the things that actually um, happened inside the hotel. So that answer from number one with the evidence from number three would have probably worked to get a two, but both students only had one or the other. Okay, number four, I gave a zero because everything I saw here it was just too vague. There's nothing specific. There's no evidence. There's no imagery. I think the way the author uses sensory images is that he talked about his dad, brother, mom, and just his family. He talked about his past. He wants to be his dad to be alive. Okay, like almost you're giving a summary of the poem, but there's just so much information. There's too many ideas being thrown out uh, that there's no specific answer. And my my father should still be alive. That's an opinion. That's not something that I see, hear, taste, smell, or touch. Okay. Number five, the second one that I put onto the tear sheet. The author uses sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memory by telling us how his life was when he was a little boy. Okay. Now, I was a little bit hesitant to give the point here because how his life was. If you're going to say that, then your evidence has to be about your life. But because his brother is part of his life, then I went ahead and gave uh, points for the answer and the evidence. Number five, my brother should still be sneaking 13 years old, sneaking rum in the bathroom, sculpting naked women. So I said an unusual example of how life was for them. Uh, if that's the way it was, um, that paints a very vivid picture for me. Okay. So when I go over here to my little form, let's look at the evidence side. My brother should still be 13, sneaking rum in the bathroom, sculpting naked women. This is more about the brother than his life. So it's kind of like I said, risky evidence if you're going to say that in your response by telling how his life was when he was a little boy, you might have done better by saying for him and his brother when they were little boys. That would be more specific. That way, there's a connection because he gets to see his brother doing that. Hopefully, that makes sense. And so that's why I kind of felt like there was just enough there to give it to. And again, writing is always subjective. Even though this, SCR is a reading skill, my understanding of the text, it seemed like the student understood the text enough to get the point for the answer and the evidence. So let's move on to, sorry, I threw away. Um, I'm going to go to number six. Okay. The author, so you have the red here for a response. The author uses sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memory by telling details about his past life. Now, this is a little bit repetitious, but at least it comes off of the words of the prompt and telling detail about his past life. So the student understood that your memory is something from your past. Okay. So I went ahead and gave the point, even though to me, like you got to be a little more careful not to repeat. So let's see if this has evidence about his past life. For example, it says in stanza 2 on line 5 and 6, it says, pretending we don't know our parents, embarrassing us. That is too vague. It, there's no context to use. We don't know where we're at, what we're doing. Like, what was this situation where we were pretending that we didn't know our parents. So since the evidence is too vague based on trying to connect it to the response, I didn't give the point. All right, for evidence. The author uses sensory images in the poem, restating the question, to convey the details of his memory by saying, okay, that was too much the same, like there was nothing, there was not an answer there. That was just the prompt repeated. Don't restate the prompt, answer the freaking question. Her daisy sandals, so now here comes some evidence, from Kmart, squeaking across the linoleum, still gorgeous in her teal swimsuit and amber earrings. So if you're going to use that evidence and you're talking about your mom here and how she looks, he could have said he used the details of his memory to describe the way that his mom would dress, even with clothing from inexpensive stores like Kmart. From inexpensive stores, I don't have to say Kmart because we're gonna use that in there. So because the evidence is about his mom and what she's wearing, your answer has to be something to do with your mom, um, uh, and her clothing or accessories. All right. Number 8, the author uses sensory images in the poem to convey the details of his memory. Okay. Again, it's the prompt only. You have to have an answer. You just can't restate the prompt because suddenly we whiplash the reader into evidence in sentence where it says rising out of the sand like a cake decoration. That's evidence, but there's a verb with no subject. I don't even know what was rising out of the sand. And so if I don't include this evidence in its context and add a little bit more information for the reader to show them, him, her, the computer that understands, then I don't deserve a point for like a partial piece of evidence that's not enough to connect, if that makes sense. Okay. So that would be number 8 in my little chart. And you see that there's nothing written for evidence and nothing written for the response. The prompt only is not going to get you a point for the answer or the response in red. The E, evidence yellow, R, response red. Okay. There was one more that the teacher gave me that I thought was kind of interesting. And so here's the response. He talks about how back in the day, how it was for him. And he talks about how him and his family went to a hotel and talking about all of his family, like his dad died and his dad didn't get to see him, and his brother to be a dog because his dad was an alcoholic and drank too much. The author uses specific words. Okay, first, that last sentence, since this sentence doesn't really contribute to the evidence or the response because it's just vague, it's better just to leave that off. Okay. Now, this is quite a bit of details. And so you probably need to cut out some of the pieces of this puzzle and focus on this part. He said that he uses imagery to show that his dad was an alcoholic and drank too much. Now, I'm going to show you based on the evidence where he got that from. My comment here for number 9 was this is a bold inference. When you infer, it's to read between the lines. And what he's doing with what he wrote was typing between the lines. The evidence is the lines. What you infer from there is what you get into your head. So I want to show you the only part, stanza 4, on only one line is there a mention about his dad drinking. So let's see if there's enough there. My father should still be in a terry cloth jacket smoking. He should still be smoking. He should still be clinking a glass of amber whiskey. So there's the one line in the entire 9 stanzas. Well, if my dad should still be here drinking whiskey, why are you saying that he was an alcoholic and drank too much? So it was a little bit too much for me to infer that the dad died because he was an alcoholic, because it never says anywhere in the poem that I could tell how he died, what was his cause of death, or anything of the such. So the reason I shared this with you is that if your students can learn how to write an answer when they get to ECR, extended constructed response, they're going to have 5 bullets that start with have a clearly stated central idea. And again, the idea is from the student's head about the topic. And then they will take evidence in the body, but they'll have to explain it in a 5-bullet that has all the things, the ways to get a 5. And then 4 more bullets are just reminders about things that you need to do. So I would say, yes, if you want to have your students write every week, it should not be an entire essay every single week. But I think that if you require at least answer and evidence, that should be fine for now. But if you're going to call it an extended constructed response, make sure it's written with the word explain at the beginning. Only one question on the test is probably going to have the word explain. That's where the prompt, the topic is. And so then your students will look for the who, what, when, where, why, which, or how, and then take it from there. So I hope you like that. I'm going to be sending this poem, the responses, and my chair acronym to all of you guys. The only one I won't send is number 9, the response 9, because of the idea that it was sent to me later by the teacher. And again, for all of you who are watching this, if you're already a member of ECR, feel free to send me 1 or 2 responses. I didn't mind this teacher sending me 9 because it was only short constructed responses. I wouldn't want to have to grade 9 extended constructed responses. Okay. But because I said that ECR is the mountain, the roof, SCR is more like the walls. I just have to write a couple of sentences. And then cups, capitalization, usage, punctuation, spelling would be like the floor. And then the basement would be your students' ability to master penmanship and keyboarding, letters, syllables, chunking, blends, consonants, vowels, long, short, all that kind of stuff. Yes, you need that in the basement. All right. But I hope that you understood my method. I have tear for ECR that I'm going to share with the fifth grade prompt, but it's only going to be how to make sure that you have a clear central idea statement since it's going to be a fifth grade prompt. What we'll be doing is looking at the topic like we did here, going straight to the evidence, the E of tear. Then we'll have the answer part, the idea that comes from the student's head, and the response part that will be restating the prompt, rephrasing the prompt, or reflecting the prompt, because you do not have to restate the prompt. You just have to respond to it. It doesn't say short, it doesn't say extended constructed repeating or extended constructed restating. You can do that for your kids. You can start that way, but please don't stay that way because I've mentioned it several times. You can't call it training wheels restating if you're going to be doing it at the beginning and in the middle and in the end. Like if you have 10 sentences and only 5 of them have something different, then you only have 5 good sentences because there's 5 sentences full of repetition. And restating the prompt once is fine, but just don't have your students do that all year long and don't have them do that throughout the entire essay. God bless you guys. Please share or tag one of your reading or writing teacher friends in this video. Those of you who are in the extended constructed response part 1 and or part 2 will get that little activity. If you were a teacher who attended one of my conference hotel trainings over the last 2 years, many of you got that tear acronym, so you just have to kind of look back. If you can't find it, unfortunately, it would have been in your little mini binder, either attached or as part of it, depending on when you came. You might consider joining my extended constructed response part 1 and or part 2. God bless you guys and have a great evening.